when you're too busy, you kind of can't see what people are doing, but you get to see the result, and you realize that as long as you make sure that those things are correct and the measurements are correct, and you let that person do what they've got to do, then they'll come back with a masterpiece. This is the thing about leadership, isn't it? That I'm measured not on how it's done. I'm not being measured on how we do it. I'm being measured on was it done, and was it done really well, and has that created revenue, has that created value, and has that created profit for sale. So therefore, if you're able to take that and realize that you're empowering your people to be really creative in doing things.
Welcome to the How They Lead podcast, hosted by Benjamin Wade and Ben Stocker. This podcast is dedicated to exploring the world of high performance, showcasing examples of how individuals and teams can reach their full potential.
Together, they'll be inviting amazing guests who have defined or represented high performance in their own right, from world record breakers to individuals who have achieved first in their fields. The How They Lead podcast will showcase a diverse range of guests, each with their unique stories and insights to share. So join us as we challenge traditional ways of doing things, explore new ideas, methods and possibilities, and evolve the way people perform. Glyn, welcome. Thank you for joining us today on our latest episode of How They Lead. Hopefully we'll get some really great insights. Well, hopefully we are going to get some great insights. Really looking forward to this episode. Some insights from your own personal life, also your business, which is going from strength to strength, as we've seen in the news. So I will hand back over to you for a little background of who you are, what you do, and why we're all chatting today.
Hi, my name is Glyn Blaize. I'm the COO of Amdaris, a software scale-up business. We have been going through an exciting journey. So we're 13 years old. However, we received investment 3 years ago, and we've gone from around circa 200 people to 1,000 people over the last 3 years. I lead the people function, the recruitment function, and our centers across Eastern Europe. So as an organization, we have about 70 people in the UK, and then the rest of our employees are across Ukraine, Moldova, Romania, Bulgaria, and Dubai.
That's a pretty interesting synopsis, especially with that growth. That's something we're going to delve into.
I know, yeah. Like, can't wait to delve into that. And I think I love this episode. I've been waiting for this episode for a while, because you're a hard person to pin down to start with, because you're very, very busy. I mean, those growth headcount numbers tell that story as well. But we've had the benefit, the privilege of getting to know Amdaris when you were about 200, 250. And kind of seeing and being a small part in that journey so far. So hopefully we can dip into some of that as well. So first off, the objective for this podcast is for us to share some lessons you've learned, some mistakes you've made, some of the wins, so we can fast track some of the learning for emerging leaders and business owners coming through. So this is all about giving and sharing. So my first question, Glyn, is what's your approach to leading people and teams?
What's my approach to leading people and teams? I kind of see myself as the great puzzle maker, and my role is to get all of the puzzle pieces in the right places so that you get like a beautiful puzzle, beautiful picture, beautiful 3D thing that you put together. But I feel like you get the right people in the right places and give them the freedom, sky's the limit.
And do you have someone that you aspire to be, or who, like a role model that did that, and you've seen how they've orchestrated that puzzle and the end result growing up or now in business as well?
Yeah. So not necessarily from a role model from that perspective, I think I've had role models who've helped me shape the way that I view the world. I think, like if I think of the first and probably the biggest influence in my life was my dad, and he was like sort of proper superhero status, came over from the West Indies in the 50s, came to England. This is the time where, black folk weren't really welcomed in the UK, had a really hard time, couldn't get a job, but he has so much resolve that he worked his way through some really, really difficult circumstances. And he would talk about stories about in the 60s where you had the skinheads, and you wouldn't be out after a certain time because you'd get beaten up by the skinheads. But he somehow worked out how to befriend these guys and ended up having his own skinhead protectors because he'd made friends. And he just had this way of looking at the world and just like seeing problems as if someone doesn't like you, or if you're not able to get where you need to get to, it's not, the challenge isn't to fight against that. The challenge is to make that person want to like you. And then I had the privilege when I was sort of a young and up and coming rookie. I knew I was going into director position, and I'd gone to Leaders in London, which was a sort of a leadership conference. And I think there was Mikhail Gorbachev, Tom Smith, Madeleine Albright, Bill Clinton, and they were all there. And the guy who compared it, he was René Carriol. So he was of Pepsi and Marks and Spencer fame. And I'm just there, and I just saw this guy, and I'm like, I want to be you. I want to be you. So I managed to find out his PA's email address and emailed her, and she says, no, René's too busy for you. And I emailed her back, and something really cheesy like, my name's Blaize, he wants to see someone called, like, just something really ridiculous. Anyway, I got this email back, and it said, René will meet you at 1 the Aldwych. You have an hour. And it was that's all it had. Didn't even know what 1 the Aldwych was at the time. I was just this young whippersnapper, and found out it was a hotel. And I went to this hotel at the time, and I sat there, and René just came in. He offered me a drink, and then we sat together, and he says, why do you want to be mentored by me? And I talked to him about my dreams, my aspirations, what I was doing with sport and things like that. And he says, I'm going to mentor you, but I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm going to tell you stories, and you're going to learn from the stories. I'm going to allow you to sit in meetings, and you're going to learn when you hear things in meetings. And it was just this, it was just a different way of just like, looking back now, it feels like, when you read these old books and it's like, and they sat at the master's feet. It was a very much like very old fashioned in that respect. And I saw him conduct meetings with CEO of Sage, and just seeing him doing like so many different things. And it was just a joy that I then used that to work out how I was going to navigate leadership and things like that. So
you learn from osmosis and just sucking up the information and how he acted and responded in different scenarios.
What a cool story.
Yeah, I like that.
What a cool story.
Would you say that everyone needs a mentor then to do what you've done, or be in the business and see the growth that you've had? Would you suggest scale-ups and startups out there, everyone tries to get a mentor?
I don't know, because I do think that I was privileged to have stumbled across someone who not only was very, very good, but I was kind of wowed by them. So I think, sometimes when you're open, aren't you? And it becomes very, very sticky. I think a mentor doesn't necessarily need to be a person. I think there's a lot of content, a lot of information, a lot of books, a lot of things out there. And I think that the key thing is not necessarily finding a mentor, but the key thing is finding the sources of knowledge that are going to enable you to be who you need to be. So, someone could read a biography of someone who, I don't know, was a great explorer, or who did some incredible things, or went through hardship, or just had a normal life, but looked at the world through different eyes. And that could tap into their inner psyche, because we're all very different in the triggers that make us do what we do. So I think if we look at mentor as a person, maybe not, but if we look at mentor as a thing, then yes, absolutely.
It's a good way of thinking. I've never heard that before.
Yeah, I really like that. I think I'm still that was an incredible story to start with, and I have so many questions. So I want to ask that question first. What would you have done if that second email wasn't answered?
I would have kept searching. I think I'd have definitely kept searching, because at the time I was listening to, the likes of Anthony Robbins and a lot of the self-help guys from America. And I really liked their energy and their passion and the way that they construct. So I was after something. So I'd have kept on looking. And I think just by nature of doing the second email, it just, I knew that there was this thing to go for. I think I would have continued. And I think at the time as well, I think, René was brilliant, but I kind of was at the start of my journey. So I would have found someone else who was hopefully just as brilliant, but it just resonated. Just everything that he did just seemed to resonate.
Yeah. And so you had that kind of quite influential moment. You've already talked about your dad as well. And then you've got this kind of business mentor, and you're very sponge-like because you're very early stage. Have you finished playing rugby at this point?
I stopped playing pro. I was now just playing village.
Just play with the rest of us. Just play with them.
What dad have I got to?
Okay, so you're in business, and business was recruitment.
Was recruitment, yes.
Business, of course, it was like one of the best industries out there. Business was recruitment, and so you've kind of taken being kind of seeing your dad kind of, as a role model for you. And then you've got this like business mentor and this concept of you're reaching for knowledge, listening to Tony Robbins and probably walking on like fires and stuff like that, following Tony Robbins. And what I'm interested in is now, so let's fast forward, because you founded, recruitment, founded a tech business, kind of exited that. And then you're in Amdaris, and you said you see yourself as like the puzzle maker. And I like the 3D switch as well. It's like this 3D puzzle. How has everything you've kind of absorbed up to this point where you're in Amdaris, like it's 200 people, how has that influenced how you've built the people team and the talent attraction team and the centers now?
There's no substitute for wisdom. I think, when you're young, you can be the brightest person in the room. You can be the brightest person in the room, but you may not have the wisdom of how things fit together. The nuances of people and personalities and environments and all of those type of things. So I think coming into Amdaris, I had quite a lot of knowledge, a lot of things which had gone really, really well and things which had gone really, really badly. One of the things that I had learned along the way is that getting the right skill sets, and sometimes in getting those right skill sets, you don't always want the perfect person for the job because you can't find them at the time. So I often think about this in terms of the teams that I've had to build. Because we had to move fast, I wasn't able to get a 10 out of 10, but I knew what were my 8 non-negotiables that I was happy with. And then I would look for the 2 things that I could supplement that they didn't have, not something that they didn't have and I couldn't supplement, because then you're at a double deficit. So that's really helped sort of building the team and saying, right, okay, so my head of people on paper, when I brought her in, a lot of people said I shouldn't have. She wasn't as experienced as she ought to be. But I could see in her that she had exactly what was needed. And when it came to sort of maturity, stakeholder management, these type of things, I knew I can take her on a journey and take her where she needs to go. But in terms of having a mind to understand that we're moving from a traditional HR process to an agile HR process, and in order for us to scale as quickly as possible, your mind needs to think differently. You need to work in sprints. You need to be iterating constantly. You need to have no fear of failure whatsoever. She had that, and I knew that was going to work. Or if you look at my head of recruitment, I knew that when it comes to developing the team and leading by example, he was very good. I'm on a data journey, and I know that one of his weaknesses is data, but I know that I can compensate for his data weakness, but he can really take a team on a journey and take a vision and a dream and take that in the direction. So I've had to build in those different ways. And, you've met my center directors in Europe, and they are absolutely brilliant, and anything that they don't have, I think along the way we can build that in, but they have that core ability to say, right, okay, it's an adventure. I always talk about this story that in Lord of the Rings, where Gandalf goes to Bilbo and he's telling him about this journey, and Bilbo's like, oh, the adventures aren't good for me, they're scary things, and he doesn't want to do it, but in the end he does do it, and it's the most exhilarating, scary, fulfilling journey he's ever been on. And I think that's what I paint to my people, is that it's going to be a freaking crazy time, but we're all going to learn along the way. We're all going to cry along the way, and we're all going to laugh along the way. But we're all going to have these experiences where we hand something back to someone else and say, look, I've learned, I've grown, I've developed.
You mentioned your 8 non-negotiables, quite specific there. Could you let us know what those are? Because I'm sure there's lots of people out there who are either on that journey at the beginning.
Now, Glyn's, I'm going to buy you some time. Glyn's going, did I say 8?
I meant 2. Glyn, can you just share a couple of those 8? Like 1 or 2 of them.
So when I say non-negotiables, I don't mean for each position, so I work off, like, let's say for instance, profiles. So if I'm hiring someone to head up HR, for instance, rather than be a job description, there'll be like a profile that I will create for that person, or what will be the right person for that role, and it will be characteristics, and I'll do that for each role. So for instance, I've got a center manager in the UK, and like she'll have like one of them was like unflappable optimism, so that makes no sense, but it does make sense in the context of the type of person I want to work within that role. Or do you know what I mean? So it's like those type of things.
I think unflappable optimism, like that's like a Myers-Briggs uplift, I think. Like, how do we interview this? They're a 9.5, unflappable optimism. How do you know that?
But the interesting thing is that people who have that, they resonate with those words and those emotions as they read it. And I noticed this in the interview process, that those who really connected had like, they were like, this is me. And they wanted to share why that was them, as opposed to, can you do this?
Yeah. Tick. Ask me I'll ask you a competency-based question on, and you can use the STAR model to answer it, and we'll learn nothing. No, I really like that, and I think the way that you've painted that picture about how like the puzzle builder, it sounds like, and I might be stretching this analogy a bit, so bear with me. It sounds like they might not be the right piece for the puzzle, but actually the picture might change, like as you're going in terms of what you're building, because you're building at scale. You know what the vision is, you know what the mission is, but actually in terms of like the journey of getting there, Lord of the Rings, like it might be a slightly different picture as we go to then morph into the end result. And that's the nature of leading and growing teams and developing people. Yeah?
I like that a lot. Yeah, I like that a lot.
Cool. Okay, well, you can have it.
Borrow that.
You can't have it. You can borrow it. I like it. You can borrow it. Okay, cool. So I think I think we've learned a lot there about in terms of like self-leadership. Like if you're going to lead people like that, then you've already shared that you're going to roll your sleeves up and get into the weeds to help them with some of the bits that they might not have right now. What's your process then in terms of like developing those bits? Because otherwise you'd never sleep. Like 1,000 people in the business. I know you work a lot anyway, but you would never sleep. So what's your process then to be able to like enable them to have more autonomy and develop that skill set? How have you gone about that process?
So because I like to be quite hands-off in my leadership, I'm very much in terms of trying to be very, very clear in creating a vision. And I think the clearer you are in the vision that you want, the easier it is for someone to work out your vision. So let's say, for instance, as we've gone on this journey, I can't do everything, but I knew that we wanted to move the human resources from a traditional, straight-laced human resources function to quite an agile human resources function, whereby these are the outcomes. So I've got these projects that I need you to achieve. Now, the way that I perhaps would have achieved it, and this is the learn for me, because I think a number of years ago, I would have probably directed how I want it to happen. And what's quite good is when you're too busy, you kind of can't see what people are doing, but you get to see the result. And you realize that as long as it's like the ingredients to a recipe. As long as you make sure that those things are correct and the measurements are correct, and you let that person do what they've got to do, then they'll come back with a masterpiece. I used to do this talk where it talks about if someone gave you a piece of marble, what do you come back with? And the value that you bring is how you give that piece of marble back to someone. Are you going to do sort of like a Michelangelo statue, or are you just going to give it with a few chips in it or whatever? And I think this is what we do with our people, isn't it? That we give them this block and we say, I need you to create, and this creation needs to be this. It needs to be this. It needs to bring this type of emotion. It needs to have this type of result. We need to achieve this. And I think this is the thing about leadership, isn't it? That I'm measured not on how it's done. When you think about it, when I sit in the SLC with the C-suite, I'm not being measured on how we do it. I'm being measured on was it done, and was it done really well? And has that created revenue? Has that created value? And has that created profit for shareholders? So therefore, if you're able to take that and realize that empowering your people to be really creative in doing things, and sometimes it goes horribly wrong, but those are just opportunities to go, right, okay, let's do better next time. And there's actually joy in that. Do you know what I mean? And like sort of, people call it failure, but I don't necessarily think it's failure. I think it's just finding out other ways to do things, because in another circumstance, that process that they went through could actually work, but the business may not be moving at that speed.
It's only failure if you don't learn from it, isn't it? If you don't learn and grow and take the lessons from it, it is failure.
Yeah, I think it's probably it's like repeating the same mistake in exactly the same scenario twice. But as you've just said, you can repeat the same process and have different results in different parameters and resources, etc. I think the statue you were looking for is the David, the Michelangelo. Yeah.
So, the marble one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say that the vision that you say and how effectively you communicate that's effectively putting in the you've mentioned riverbanks or the guidelines, isn't it? So if you can get across your vision in a really concise manner, that gives people the guidelines to operate within, and then they have the autonomy and you're empowering them to come back to you with those results, but they get your vision and the overall goal.
And get them excited. I think if there's one thing that I feel like I'm good at is galvanizing people around something bigger than themselves. Like, if there's like a superpower that I've got is like, it's like I can create this vision of something that we all need to run at. Like, I don't know how we're going to do it, but I can create something that's really, really exciting and compelling. And that's really worked quite well. And then it's bringing the pieces of the puzzle that that they're going to be able to get this, and they're going to use their crazy imaginations and resourcefulness to achieve great things.
Can I ask a question we haven't covered yet at all on any of these?
Yeah.
Imposter syndrome. You just mentioned, well, you referred yourself to as a superhero, or superpowers at least. But have you ever had imposter syndrome? And if you have, how can people get across or get over that? You might not have done, but it's just something we haven't really covered. But actually, given how quickly you've grown and the scale that you've got to in a short space of time, and how well you're effectively leading, has that ever cropped up, that imposter syndrome for you personally?
So yes, the answer is yes, but the answer is it's not crippling. So it would be back in like 2003, 2004, the Brian Tracy did a series. I've forgotten what it was called. But as part of the series, you woke up in the morning and you looked in the mirror and you went, I love myself. I'm going to do something amazing today. And you did that 11 times. And I used to, and it's really American and it's really narcissistic. But, when I believe that, this like a lot of these, like imposter syndrome and what cripples people is the actual self-talk that goes on when like you're an imposter, and then it's either I can crush this, or I am, what am I going to do? Kind of thing. But, from the imposter syndrome has not necessarily been the challenge for me. The challenge for me sometimes has been like, as a black man in business, sometimes I'm going into settings whereby there is no one who looks like me, sounds like me. Well, maybe not sounds like me, but like no one who looks like me, or people aren't used to like my type. And I know that sometimes I'm dealt with differently, and you have to understand the way the battle lines are drawn, but still plow the right way and still live with integrity and still have that confidence. And that's something that I've had to learn along the way, and I found difficult as a younger man. But now I'm old.
But the way you mentioned taking that and using it positively, have you found that has really, really helped as well? Like how positive you are and how you come across and you're memorable and your persona as well. Has that played to your advantage as well and really helped in business, do you think?
I think so. I think I'm a very optimistic, glass full, not even half full, but like glass full the whole time, even when things, put to a bit overflowing. My glass overfloweth. Yeah, that type of person. So I think in that respect, it has the benefit of being infectious, I think, which probably helps me in a lot of situations where if I was probably a little bit calmer and not like that it may not help as much. So, there are these things.
There's two things that I see in Glyn, and we've known each other for years now. And years, we are old men. I just live by the beach. It doesn't show as much. So two we'll edit that. Yeah. Right. Well, you're a superhuman, so fine. Okay. So two things. The first thing is the imposter syndrome bit's really, really interesting. And I think you talked about like internal self-talk, and there's positive self-talk, like affirmations were effectively what you were doing when you were talking to yourself in the mirror. But then there's space for a lot of like over awareness and reflection, which I think can lead to apathy and a lack of action if people are in that space. I think what I've seen in the way that you operate and other people who overcome an element of imposter syndrome and stepping up to bigger and bigger roles is action. And actually, if you are maintaining forward momentum, you kind of don't have time for an awful lot of that negative self-talk, because you're like, how do I get to the next thing? How do I get to the next thing? So I think I see that as well in what you're saying. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is that fair?
No, I'd say that's very fair.
Yeah, like that. Yeah, it's just something that came up with a couple of our clients, that imposter syndrome. We've never really discussed it, so it sounded like the right opportunity to bring that up and just see if you'd experienced it. So I appreciate that. Thank you for opening up and explaining all.
And I think the second bit, because I did say two, and I must finish with the second bit. The second bit is attitude and optimism and energy. And I think there's something that can be. There's an interesting piece around, should you have like the shouty kind of alpha leader, or the more controlled kind of considerate leader? And there are people that are either end of that continuum and a bunch of people in the middle. And I think there's a difference there between loud and direct and introverted and quiet. And that this is something different, which I think is energy and enthusiasm. And I think energy and enthusiasm goes an awful long way when it comes to leading, collaborating, but also following. Like the people, we all follow people, whether that's customers or CEOs or whatever. Like if you follow with enthusiasm, you're going to get a better result. And I think one of my really good friends said to me, he's a pastor, and I remember he was giving a talk, and he said, I can't remember what the talk was about, but he said this. It was really
strong talk.
A strong talk. But the bit that landed with me, his name's Chris, and he looks after church in Reading. He said, you have two opportunities when you walk into a room. You can even be a thermostat or a thermometer. Choose to be a thermostat. Like set the tone, set the energy level. Yeah. Now you can do that within your skill set and parameters of whether you are quiet. You can still set like an intensity of tone and energy. And I think that's probably a bit of one of your superpowers, like from knowing you. Like that infectious energy really comes across. And I've observed that in the people that you work with.
Does it ever come across that people will become overly friendly though? Because the way you're persona, you're very easy to get on with and likable. So do people take that as being overly friendly? And actually then when you have to lay down the law or be the head of a hyper-growth business, have you ever found it hard to achieve that balance? Or have you always managed to step aside?
We talked about this. We went out to dinner with the team yesterday. We got the new stars and went out to dinner. And it was quite nice. The team was saying that they kind of always know where I stand. But I've worked out over the years ways of saying things in a way that is sufficiently straight, sufficiently clear, but doesn't knock someone down or whatever. So we will always stay friends. And I will always try to hire people who are very good at wanting feedback and dealing with feedback and responding to feedback. And I've had some really interesting conversations with my direct reports where we've had to have some really, really, really tough conversations, and it hurts me. It's like when you're doing it and you're feeling the pain because you don't want them to feel the pain, but you know that this is really important for their development and their growth. And I think that they then respect you, that you take the time and you go through the pain in order to move forward with them. And I think if you speak to my team, they'll tell you about some instances where we've had to have those type of conversations.
And did you dig into that in the interview process? Because that's a really good learning point to take away, that actually having someone who can take feedback well is critical from the sound of it. How do you judge that in the interview process?
Yeah, so in the interview process, you've got questions where you probe, and I may throw things out, but I think there is something about in your gut as you're going through a process. The older I get, yes, there is the formulaic way of doing things, but I do realize that, or I do think that the gut does play a big part in building the right types of teams with the right types of people. You get a feel for it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of research around like decoding what gut instinct is, and actually, it's layers and layers and layers and layers and layers of experience that are then analyzed at a semi-conscious level. Like that's why I guess a gut instinct of someone in their 20s is not necessarily as refined as someone who's done a bit more time, made many hires, and seen the fruits of their performance.
I guess the trap you could fall into though with gut instinct is that you tend to hire those that are similar to you, that you get on well with. So you end up with a puzzle of similar pieces rather than unique pieces all coming together.
Back on the puzzle.
I'll just throw that.
Yeah. I'm interested. I want to lean into that, these feedback conversations, if I can. Here we go. So this is not a coaching session, but to manage, like it's a skill to give someone some critical but developmental feedback with a good intent, but to have that hard conversation is a skill. So do you have a conscious process you go for in terms of preparing for those conversations? Or do you just go in? And if it is a process, how do you go about making sure that conversation has a good outcome?
I'll step back. So depending on who giving feedback to, because I think we have quite an open communication style as an SLT. So sometimes I'll be communicating things that I may have issues with, or people may have on the SLT, which may be slightly different to the way that I would do it with my team. So with the SLT, we might be a little bit more robust in the way that we go at each other, knowing that we are like brothers. We're going to eat at the table later on. So this is just a kind of a fight that brothers have, and brothers and sisters, sorry. When it comes to the team, I've learned that you need to prepare. I have learned that you need... Honestly, like, as in, it doesn't matter how many superpowers you've got. You don't know how they're going to respond, how they're going to take it, what's going to come back what are the other factors that have caused them to do what they're having to do. So therefore, not preparing just puts you in a very, very, very difficult situation. So yes, to prepare. I think some of the worst advice that I was ever given was, you've got to do the shit sandwich. It's just the most awful way of doing things, and it's like a universal way that people are taught to do good news, bad news, good news, and it just kills it. Whereas people want you to be authentic, and they want you to be clear, and they want to know that you have their best interest at heart. There's a book by Erin Mayer called Culture Map, and that book has helped me know. So imagine I'm used to dealing with Brits, and all of a sudden I'm thrown into this position where I'm dealing with Ukrainians 1 minute, Moldovans another minute, Bulgarians, and these cultures, they're Eastern European, but they've got all of their various differences and colorfulness and beauty and all of that. But they understand the world very, very differently. And I struggled a bit at the start because I wanted to be quite a diplomatic, open leader. And in some of the situations, they wanted an autocratic approach to feedback. They wanted to be beaten up, but that's not the way that I do it. But then when you do it that way, you get the best results coming back, and then you'll flip into the English way, and, it's like, oh, that was a bit harsh, kind of thing. I say, like, so all of this was going on, and then I sort of read the Culture Map by Erin Mayer, and it really helped me to understand the context of different cultures and how to culturally engage with different individuals when you are providing feedback, or even giving instructions and things like that.
Yeah.
It's funny you should bring that up. It's literally on LinkedIn today I mentioned about giving feedback, and one of the biggest questions that we find is regularly not asked is just asking the person how they like to receive it. Like, many times that's missed. It's such a crucial step into giving effective feedback. You just assume everyone likes to receive it the same way you do. But if I tried to do that on Ben, for example, it would go down horrifically because we don't receive feedback in the same way.
Yeah, completely. And there's there was a story in the last business I was in full time before setting up West Peak. There was one person who did something exceptionally well. Okay, so they client meeting, absolutely smashed out of the park, came back, loads of work, and their director in front of the whole sales floor was like, just want to shout out this person, round of applause, everyone stood up, etc. That person's performance fell off a cliff. Okay, and it's like head of L&D and performance, like, was observing this, and I was like, what's going on? Like, this person was absolutely like up there, rocketing, and had a conversation with them. I was like, well, what's going on? They said, well, like, I just don't want like praise in an open public environment. So I actually subconsciously, what that person had done is they just lowered themselves just below the bar. just to avoid praise. And that hit me like square between the eyes in terms of, we think about feedback and the danger of giving constructive feedback in the wrong way. But also, as Ben said, just onboarding, welcoming someone into a new team as a leader, understanding like, how do you like to receive praise? How do you like to receive feedback? And you talk about taking a cultural approach. I think there's taking an individual approach as well, which is really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we've covered quite a bit there in terms of like followership, leadership, especially on your journey. I just want to dig into a little bit about the West Peak, if that's all right. You obviously know the reason why it was named West Peak, but for the viewers at home who haven't already heard it quite a few times, it's all about that false summit. So you've learned things, you've grown with the business, you've got to the peak of your career, and then suddenly you realise there's a false peak. It was a false summit, and actually there's far more behind that first peak than you ever thought was possible. And it almost brings you back down to ground again. In mountaineering, quite often get people taken off the first summit because they've relaxed, they thought they were there, but there's a whole lot more behind that first summit. So have you got any experiences in your career or personally where you thought you were at the top, you're just about there, you peaked over, and there's a whole lot more hidden away behind it? And how did you cope with that?
Probably the story of my career, actually, realizing there's more. I think one of the biggest ones for me was I was a sales director at recruitment business in London, and this was my first sales director position. And I'd been at the business, I'd gone through, become sales director, and then I got promoted to commercial director. And we were looking at working towards exit. How are we going to do it? And I was tasked. Because I'd done quite well, I was tasked with sort of planning out this way in which we were going to do it. And I delivered this plan, and it had taken ages. I'd worked with the team on how to get to this plan, and the plan was about how the business was going to be structured moving forward, how we were going to do everything commercially, what was going to go on, what clients we were going to bring in, how we were going to get to X amount of million. And it was a really, really good plan. And part of the plan was that the way in which we paid commissions and the way in which we structured the financial side of the business needed to change quite drastically. And on paper, it made so much sense how we were going to rock it. We were opened in Dubai as well, everything like that. Delivered this plan, took the employees through where we were going and what we were doing. CEO or the founders were like really happy and everything like that. Did the old mic drop, I'm great, lap of honor, put on the budgie smugglers, off to the whatever. Anyway, it was summer when I did. It was just before summer when I delivered it, and one of the employees had gone on holiday and met one of my close friends, and one of my close friends says, "I've just met one of your employees and they hate you." And I was like, "What?" And this person hadn't given me any inkling that they hated me. And what transpired over the next few months was that I'd created this plan and not taken into consideration that in changing the commission structure, in changing salaries, that people were supporting ill parents who they needed money to support. People were saving for houses. People had weddings that they were planning. And in making these unilateral business changes that looked really good on paper, I'd literally changed the lifestyle and the life dreams of a group of, a certain amount of people within that business without thinking about it. To me, what I had done at the time was I created the world's most amazing commercial plan, which was going to give us an amazing route to exit. But on the other hand, I had lost half of my sales team and like really good salespeople along the way because I hadn't thought about where they were and where they sit and what their circumstances were and all of that. And as a young leader, manager, boy, I liked to be, and it's really good, I liked to be liked. So the fact that someone didn't like me, oh man, that killed me. And then when I realized there was a number of people that I had impacted, killed me even more. And I think that was this bit where you just realize that, hey, it's not all about fancy commercial plans and things like this. It's about people. And I from that day onwards, I've always said that, however far we go in business, we've got to be willing to make sacrifices for the whole, not just for the few who are at the top of the tree. And that was like a huge learning experience for me, like just lying awake at night, just thinking about, like when I'd realized the amount of damage I'd wreaked, just realizing that, and the feeling that what I thought was the mic drop moment was actually one of the shittest moments of my career. Do you know what I mean? It's like it couldn't have been more poles apart. And that was like my West Peak. And then I had to start climbing that other peak again, slowly with my tail between my legs, weeping a little bit as I went and trying to, repair the damage that I'd done.
What would you have done differently now you've had all this time to think back? And apart from obviously not doing the same thing, but is there anything tangible that people can take away, such as getting like that first follower, or getting the engagement and the following from the employees first of all, or discussing it with them? Sounds like that might have been lacking. Or...
Yeah, I think, and this is what I do. I do a lot of this now. So when, like, obviously we're growing really, really quickly, and there's a number of things that we're doing, and I've got like what I call I call it the insights. We have an insights call, and on the insights call, I will say like, here's an idea, here's something I'm doing, this is the plans that I want to do. What do you think about it? And so on it, I've got my team, my wider teams. You've got all of the HR, you've got recruitment, you've got my center directors, and you've got others on that call. And I will throw this out to them. And the interesting thing is, it's like you realize that the sum of the heads is so much greater than like when you're relatively successful, sometimes you do think you know a lot. And like, I'm just constantly on these insights calls, realizing that I see half the elephant, or not even half the elephant. I see the backside of the elephant. Do you know what I mean? And they're all looking at all of the other parts, and they throw things in. And like, it's quite interesting. We've got like a war room at the moment, and like, there's certain things that we plan to do. And I was like, we're not doing this anymore, because I've taken this to my team, and they've brought back these concerns and these issues, and we hadn't considered that. So I've really learned just to really make sure. And sometimes it's like, you're still going to do it, but having communicated it, people get used to the idea and they prepare for it. And I think part and parcel of what happened before is that I hadn't given anyone any time to like prepare or anything like that. There was no sort of lead in. It's like, yeah, no.
We're paying your commission annually.
Yeah.
So like, I think that's such a good, like just a great like package there in terms of the insights bit, the listening through the business, and like the best idea must win. But is it the best idea? Like, because it's not fully formed, you're only seeing parts of it. And I think that takes a lot of it takes a lot of humility and vulnerability, because actually you're saying, I've got this great idea, it's really sparkly, and I'm going to put it out there, and I've set the expectation with everyone that I give them the trust that they'll shoot it down if it's not the right idea, and I will listen. But also the realism bit, that actually some of that stuff may just have to happen, but you've enabled them to go through the change curve first. You've got some change evangelists who are like, okay, this might be a bit shit, but we've come to terms with it, and we're going through the change curve before the rest of the business. I think there's two really, really interesting bits there. Let's do some quick fire. Glyn, are you ready?
Got a couple of questions each. Got a couple of questions to throw out at you. I think you're allowed one pass, but we have to come back to it.
Why is he smiling? So she's like, yeah, let's go.
So, as Ben said, you're allowed one pass, but all that pass does is delay it to the end. Okay, you still have to answer it. So we'll do two each. They're over there, which is why Ben's looking over there. He'll go first because he's older and taller and better looking.
Right.
And then I'll go. Are you ready?
Okay, yeah. I would hire who if I could?
I know stock and more, so I'd go with the no. I'd go with the no.
Oh, no, it doesn't have to be us.
Oh, no, it didn't have to be any of us. It could have been anyone.
It's a tradition.
Oh, thank you.
No, that'd be the name of your favourite host. That would be a trick question.
Awkward.
We'll go with Ben.
Awkward.
No, I got out of everyone apart from the two of us. Who would you hire?
Anybody.
If anybody, who would you hire?
If I could hire anyone in the world?
Yes. Apart from both of us.
That's such a good question. Jesus.
Oh, very good answer. Right, okay. Quick fire. Start from scratch or improve?
Start from scratch.
Failure is
learning.
Failure is learning. Okay. who should be our next guest on the podcast?
These are really good questions, aren't they? Can we come back to that one? Or is
Yeah,
that the last one?
okay, go on. That's the last one, but we'll have one more. Okay, so whilst you're thinking about that one,
Lead from the front or the back?
oh yeah, lead from the front or the back?
From the front.
And our final question is, who do you think should be our next guest on the podcast?
Oh, good question.
Oh, thank you.
I don't know. Someone sporty.
Someone sporty. Okay.
Someone who's crossed the Rubicon of sports to business.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Any particular field? Any particular sport?
I just think it's quite interesting. Like you meet a lot of people who've like grown up through business, and you meet a lot of people who've done really, really well in sport. You don't always meet those people who've done exceptionally well in business and sport. And like, what else did they have to learn from being elite to being elite?
Nice.
So we didn't even actually cover that. I guess as a closing remark then, is there one thing that you took that we could learn from the professional rugby field to business? What one thing have you taken? Because we didn't actually delve into your rugby playing background and what you've taken off the pitch.
Yeah, I think if there's one thing, like if I was to think about like the best teams or whatever that I've played on and things like that, is like there is a place for everyone. Do you know what I mean? And not everyone's got to be like, I think of it in terms of not everyone needs to be a superstar or rock star, you know? So like when you're playing rugby, you may have this prop who's just really technically proficient and just does their thing week in, week out. But then you've got this fullback who's this mercurial talent who's running around. Do you know what I mean? But everyone's got their place. And that's what I try to have on the teams, you know, whereas I think sometimes your nature would be to have superstars everywhere. I just want the best people everywhere. But actually, you need the mixture.
And knowing their skill set, and that's what your position does. Nice.
I love that. That's
you.
a really good place to finish. Glyn, thank you so much for your wisdom, for your time.
I'm sure it's been fun, and we've taken a lot from it, a lot of lessons learned. Appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
Pauses.
Thanks very much for that. Well,
thanks for joining us on the How They Lead podcast.
we hope you've enjoyed this episode and learned something new about the world of high performance.
If you have any feedback or suggestions for future episodes, please don't hesitate to reach out to us.
And don't forget to subscribe to the How They Lead podcast on your favourite platform so you never miss an episode.
Until next time, keep pushing yourself to reach your full potential and evolve the way you perform.
And remember, just because something has always been done a certain way doesn't mean doing it a new way can't work.